Think about water cycle. You might have heard that before. How many of you have heard of the water cycle before? Excellent. I'd like you to turn to the person who is sitting on your left. That would be this side. And tell them what you think the water cycle is. Ready? Go. Okay, so is the water cycle, let's see if this will work, some really cool new type of bicycle. Yeah, I think that looks like fun. I think I want to try that, pedaling on the water. I mean, that guy's got to be moving pretty fast, so you're going to be going along the water like that. So that is not the water cycle. Okay, so we're going to let the fun begin. Okay, this diagram right here is very similar to one that we had when we studied the watershed toward the beginning of the year. And remember that the watershed was the area where water drains. Remember watershed? And so you recognize some things here. We've got the sun there, and we've got our trees growing there, and we have the river. And so there are a lot of features here that are very common to the watershed poster that we had earlier. And so the water cycle can start anywhere in the cycle, but we usually start with, what's this thing? Sun. And what form of energy do we get from the sun? Heat. Try it again. Which is the main form? Light energy. Light energy from the sun transforms into heat energy when it strikes the earth. So we have talked about how energy transformations, changing from one form to another. So the light energy strikes the earth, turns into heat energy. That heat energy is absorbed by the water, and it causes the water to change from a liquid to a gas. Does anybody remember what we call the water when it becomes a gas? It is called water, go.
Vapor.
Vapor. Water vapor. Excellent. So that water vapor is now in the air, and sometimes when it goes up into the air, it gives up its heat, and that water vapor changes from a gas to a liquid. This is called condensation. Can you say condensation?
Condensation.
Condensation. So what do we call it when water vapor changes from a gas to a liquid? That is called?
Condensation.
Excellent. What do we call it when water changes from a liquid to a gas? It is called?
Evaporation.
Evaporation. Excellent. So once that water condenses into those clouds, and clouds are really tiny little water droplets, and sometimes those clouds have to move. They don't just stay in one place, do they? So we call that transportation. Trans meaning moving from one place to another. Transportation is, what does it say? Movement of solid, liquid, and gaseous water through the atmosphere. So those clouds are moving from one place to another. The air and the water, it's always moving all the time, and some days a little bit more than others. Like the other day when it was really, really windy outside, there was a lot of transportation happening that day. Okay, so those clouds move. Sometimes that condensed liquid forms droplets, or ice crystals, or ice pellets, and that falls as, what's this word? Precipitation. That can be rain, that can be snow, that can be sleet, that can be hail, and it depends on the temperature of the atmosphere. So if it is really cold up in those clouds, and the water that's up there, those water droplets freeze into these funky little crystals that float through the air, and we build all kinds of cool objects out of them, we can get snow. If the atmosphere is fairly warm all the way down, we get rain. We've had lots of experience with that lately. And sometimes we have water that falls down and it freezes kind of at the last minute close to the ground, and it becomes little ice pellets called sleet. And then if it's really kind of cold up in the upper parts of the clouds, those water droplets get pushed up higher by rising air, and they freeze and they gather more ice on them, and they fall as little ice balls called hail. And that's pretty cool. We see those things fall down. Okay. So we have that precipitation falling down, and then sometimes that forms runoff. Remember, you've been out at recess and we watched that rainwater running down, especially the little river that forms between the big toy and the gym, and you see that water rushing down there? So we have runoff that comes into those rivers. And from the rivers and streams, we call that surface water flow. Okay, so it's surface water, it's on the surface, and it flows right on out to the rivers and to the oceans, and sometimes it gets stuck in lakes for a little while. Okay, but there are more things that can happen to that water that's in the air besides falling as rain, snow, sleet, and hail. What do we call it when we have rain, snow, sleet, or hail? It is called precipitation. Excellent. So sometimes we have water that's in the air that forms frost immediately. We call that deposition. You see the word deposit in there?
Yes.
If you deposit something, you put something down. Sometimes our dogs deposit things in the backyard. So you must watch your step. So deposition is when water vapor changes directly into ice. It goes from a gas to a solid without changing to a liquid first. It's really, really, well, cool. Oh, you guys are a tough crowd. Okay, so deposition, just think about the water vapor is deposited as ice. So it's frost, some pretty cool ice crystals. It's fun to go stomping and crushing them. Those ones that raise up really tall and they get dirt on the top of them and you can crush them into little bits. Anybody ever do that? Oh, come on, you know we've all done it. Yeah, okay, good. Now, there's something else that happens. Sometimes that ice evaporates directly into the air as water vapor. It doesn't turn to a liquid first. Have you ever seen dry ice?
Yes.
And you see it has a little vapor coming off of it? That's actually frozen carbon dioxide, and it does not melt into a liquid first. It goes directly into a gas. That's what happens with this word, sublimation. Can we say that one? Sublimation. Ice evaporates directly into a gas. What do we call it when ice evaporates directly into a gas?
Sublimation.
Sublimation. That's kind of a cool word. Mom, I learned about sublimation today. And the next time you see dry ice at a Halloween party or something, you can say, well, that's an example of sublimation going on there. And everybody will look at you and go, oh my gosh, you are so smart. And you can go, well, yes, of course I am. Okay, so something else happens to this water. Sometimes that water infiltrates the ground. We've talked about how, secret agents might infiltrate some kind of organization to learn important information. Well, water can infiltrate. And when water infiltrates, it does what? Water soaks into the ground. Okay, that water goes into the ground. And when that water is in the ground, we call it groundwater. It kind of makes a little sense. And the beginning of the year when we were looking at watersheds, does somebody remember what we call the storage reservoir for water underground? It's called a ground level. It's a word that means water. It starts with an A. There's a superhero who has the name something man. Julissa? Aqua. Okay, it is an underground aquifer where water is stored. And so that groundwater sometimes gets taken up by plants. We call that plant uptake. So it enters the, what part of the plants? The roots, okay? So the trees and the plants soak up some of that water from the ground. They see the water there, they say, I'm thirsty. Those roots fit down and grab that. It's like, yum, yum, yum. Okay, and so now that water is in the trees, and so we're going to go to this tree over here. But that water can evaporate from the trees too. There are little openings in the leaves called stomata, and we didn't really learn about those yet, but those open up and they let water vapor out. So water vapor evaporates from plants and trees in a process we call transpiration. What is transpiration? Water evaporates from plants and trees. Okay, excellent. So now it's back into the air as water vapor, and it could start that cycle kind of all over again. Now, water that goes underground can take another route besides plant uptake and transpiration. It can go to oceans and rivers, and sometimes it stays in the ground for thousands of years. Other times, that water that is in the ground can be drawn out of the ground by wells when people dig holes in the ground, and we can suck that water right out of the ground like a big straw. So, what I want you to do is, starting with light energy from the sun, turn to the person to your right this time and explain what happens when that light energy hits a drop. At least go through 3 different stages. Ready? Go. Excellent choice, Mike. Way to solve the problems. Unless you can
Just watch that.
Now, turn to the person to your left and explain, wait, what happens with this raindrop right here? And it hits the ground. What could possibly happen to that raindrop? Ready? Go. Okay, we can review the process again, and then I want to remember our learning target is that we can describe the water cycle starting from any point in the water cycle. So we have our drop of water floating out in the ocean, but could that drop of water also be part of the runoff?
Yeah.
That drop of water could start in a snowman that you have built in the yard. So maybe it's starting as a piece of ice. And so light energy from the sun transforms into heat energy and causes that water to change into a water vapor in a process that is called evaporation. Now that water goes up into the air, and sometimes when that air cools, that water turns from vapor back into a liquid in a process called condensation. We went from evaporation to condensation. And that water can also move through the air in a process that is called transportation. It's been transported through the air like you get transported to school or to soccer practice. And sometimes that water then comes back to the earth in the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail in a process that is called precipitation. Other times it may become frost directly from the air in a process called deposition. And when that ice, the sun comes out, sometimes that ice evaporates directly into the air in a process called sublimation. Good. Sometimes water soaks into the ground in a process called infiltration. What do we call it when trees and plants soak up water from the ground? Plant uptake. What do we call it when water soaks into the ground? Infiltration. You kind of go like infiltration. That's kind of cool. And what do we call it when water evaporates from trees? It's a process called transpiration. Okay. And what do we call that water that moves through the ground and it transports materials back to the ocean? Subsurface outflow. So sub meaning below, so it's below the surface. Outflow meaning it's flowing out from one place to another. Okay, so I want you to think about now, you built a snowman out here, maybe over here. What could happen to a drop of water, or right now it's trapped as ice. What happens to that piece of ice in that snowman? What could happen next? I'm going to take volunteers. Think about it for a moment. What's something that could happen next to that piece of ice that is in the snowman? Destin?
Milk.
Okay, that could melt, so now it has become liquid water. Jonah, what could happen next?
It could turn into water.
So, okay, so now it's water. What happens to that water drop? Go. It could be part of the runoff. Excellent. What else? Excellent, it could sink into the ground. What do we call it when it sinks into the ground? Infiltration. Excellent. What else could happen to our water, Jaleesa? it could evaporate in a process called what? Evaporation. It even has vapor in the word itself. Ryan, what else could happen? Exactly. Once it's soaked in the ground, that plant could take it in a process called plant uptake. Okay. Anything else that could possibly happen to that water droplet once it has been... What's another process that could happen to that ice besides melting into water? What is something else? Harmony? Sublimation. Excellent. When ice evaporates directly into the air, just like that dry ice in the Halloween punch. Which you'd always be very careful with because little pieces of dry ice can sometimes break off and float and they can damage your esophagus if you drink it. So that's that little tube that goes from your mouth down to your stomach. That's a great question. Okay? It's the one that I use far too often when I get home. I'm using my esophagus all night long. Eat, chomp, 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 chomp. Okay, so sometimes water that falls and becomes ice can get trapped in a large sheet of ice, like a river of ice up in the mountains. And it starts with a G. Does somebody remember what that thing is called? That large sheet of ice?
Yeah.
Okay. What is it called? A glacier. Thank you. So that can get trapped there for thousands of years. Okay. Starting with a water droplet in a cloud. Tell somebody next to you what might happen to it. Ready? Go.